Okay, Rick, let's talk a little bit about community life, forming communities, and especially in relationship to the question of the truth, the pursuit of truth. I suppose when we think of truth, the opposite is falsity, of living with some sort of illusions personally and not presenting ourselves as we really are to others. The quest for truth has to be done within community life, I think. We do have this sort of solitary notion of the quest for truth. I think you go off and you make a retreat and you try to understand who you are, and maybe you're quiet with that, or somebody living in a family life has to just get away for a while and ponder who they are and how they fit into the whole community. So there is sort of an isolated notion of the pursuit of truth. It's connected with people going into a library and doing research and maybe eventually publishing that and so on. But there's also a way in which we would think of the pursuit of truth in a communal way, where it's not just an isolated matter, but we're doing it with others, we're building on what others have found out, and we're willing to share what we have learned. So that would be the context in which I'd tried to look at this whole question, the pursuit of truth within community life. You want to comment on that at all?
I always like making whatever I'm working with personal. Again, I grew up in a situation where I got a sense of when I would be with people, people would say I was a really good listener. But I found I would almost always change my point of view to whatever theirs was. And on various issues, when I'd be with whatever the controversy might be, I'd be with one group and I could be at home with them, and then I'd go be with the other group and I'd be at home with them, and I'd find that I would keep changing almost my beliefs or my outlook in order to be accepted, because I guess there was a fear of conflict or a fear of being different. And what went on in my mind was the statement, well, but what do I know? But what do I know? And recently I've come across some material in it that echoes a lot of the things I've heard from you. Being involved in the great conversation, and you've talked about that as you looked at some of the theologians of the 20th century and grappling with the real issues of life and death, the meaning of life, etc. What I came across was a definition of truth that has given me some new courage, I think. I believe it comes from Parker Palmer, a contemporary writer, and he says that truth is an eternal conversation about things that really matter, conducted with passion and discipline. When we get into the areas around things that really matter, around freedom and discipline, around the private life and the public life, or grace and works, or whatever it is, how to lead our lives, it's the important issues, the really important issues, seem to be contradictions, and it's something that you can't pin down. And what it's helped me see is that it's good to have humility, like I've in some ways have had in listening to people, but it's important for me to speak the truth that I have within me. It's important for me to be committed to some judgment of my own and enter that into that conversation. That's the way to get to the truth, is through this. I think there was a statement of, the truth is a large matter and requires various angles to be seen in the round. And I have to contribute my insight, my wisdom. And it's helped me to have the courage to begin to speak out as well as to listen.
Rick, let me take you back to the first part of what you said there, that in various settings you would find yourself modifying your statements or almost changing your general outlook on a position and so on. I think, again, that is a common human tendency to not have the courage of our convictions, or to try to be in various groups, to act in a way that makes one acceptable within various groups. Now, there's some people who hear that and say, "Oh, that's not me. I wouldn't ever do that. I'm a person of courage and conviction and so on." But I think that all of us would have to look more closely at that to see in what ways we find ourselves pulled in particular way by the culture in which we live, or by the socioeconomic class that we inhabit, or by the people that we hang around with, or the people that we respect, and so on. I believe that one will often find a certain tendency along the line that you're suggesting there, to be pulled, to be maneuvered in a sense. And a lot of times it's more subtle. It's not just a clear thing, well, I'm here on Monday with this group and I say this, and tomorrow, Tuesday, I'm in a different group, I say something totally different, or I say something different in my family than I say at work, although that happens. But I think the problem is people often experience is much more subtle than that. We're sort of co-opted into a way of thinking. Some people have talked about that in terms of false consciousness, of not seeing the world true and whole, because the symbols that we ingest or take into ourselves from the culture form a grid that blinds us to certain realities. And I think that we would all need to look more carefully at that. In other words, I think what you describe very personally and graphically is a part of the common human temptation. It is hard to speak the truth in various settings. I mean, priests will tell you that in terms of preaching, whether they're going to preach the social gospel or not. There's very few priests and clergymen generally who end up preaching the social dimension of the gospel. There's surveys that show that. And the suggestion is that the reason they don't is because they realize that their bad vibrations are coming their way while they're doing that, because it's a challenging message, and that people don't want to hear it, and you're going to hear a certain amount of opposition to what you had to say. You anticipate that ahead of time. And I think that's an example. So then very many clergy persons just say, well, I shy away from that. I talk about things that are less controversial, or that won't produce those bad vibrations in the congregation. Here is an example, I think, of the false kind of living that we're talking about here. And I think other people could see it at work. Well, I just sort of look beyond this. If people are speaking against certain ethnic or racial groups at work, I don't say anything, because people think I'm crazy or that I'm a do-gooder or whatever, so I just pass it by. Or people in family conversations might well adopt that same sort of posture where I don't want to make any waves. I don't want to make my parents angry. I don't want to make my kids upset. Therefore, we sort of just pass over the truth here. So it becomes a matter of living with a certain hypocrisy. That might be too strong a word, but it's certainly not the level of truth sharing that your quote from Parker Palmer suggests.
Right. And it's what you're describing is how often in our church communities as well as other groups, we often stay at the level of what we described last time as pseudo-community and pull back from the conflict rather than engage in the great conversation. The great conversation is sorting out, working through, challenging each other around these different perceptions of what is the truth here. Like, give you an example of, I'm beginning to have some more courage. My wife and I have, our marriage has sort of been around working with the children, but very little conflict between us, because when conflict comes up, we pull back from it. And now this has given me some courage, and I think her some courage too now, to where the issue is around freedom and discipline around the kids, to engage in that conversation, that we have a difference of opinion about it, and somehow the truth will get closer to the truth if we engage in that difference and challenge each other and talk about it rather than say something, she says something, and then we both pull back and one or the other wins. And that's sort of been a pattern for us in the past, not to let the conflict last more than a a moment or two.
Someone has suggested it's really important in communities like families or any other grouping that you get to the stage where you can argue. Yes. And that really is not easily achieved. Right. I mean, it's easy to shout at one another, or it's easy to get mad and bring out the heavy weaponry to hurt the other person. But it is another thing to get to the point where one can argue constructively. To do that, you have to have a number of things. You have to have a certain fundamental trust that's built up between the people involved, so that they don't just think the other person's out to get them or is a terrible person, and whatever they'll say will be used against them. If you've got that kind of situation, you can forget about community life or finding truth within the community, because then you're always afraid to say whatever you're thinking, because if you admit a weakness or express a vulnerability or express a doubt about something, then it will be used against you. And if the other person's going to do that, then you don't have a chance, or if the group's going to attack you for it. So, first of all, to do what you want to accomplish here, we have to have a sense of mutual trust that has to be built up, I suppose, over a period of time. And then we have to be able to have some common agreement on fundamental questions. That one, for example, that it is helpful to dialogue rather than to escape from the issue. That is a human thing to do. Or maybe another fundamental conviction would be that, well, if we honestly pursue dialogue and we open this thing up, talk about our differences, that it's possible to clear the air, or it's possible to move to a truth deeper than either one of us sees now. That might be another kind of conviction. I don't suppose it's often articulated in that way, but you can see it when it's at work, when people really can talk with one another. I think it's because they sense that, yes, we can both learn. It's not just a matter of me cramming my opinion down your throat or convincing you or showing you that I'm smarter than you are or that I'm right in this argument, but that we both are searching for a truth greater than we currently possess. So my second point there, after saying to accomplish what you want to accomplish, you've got to have trust. Then you, in order to argue well, to get to the point where you can argue. But you also have to have some sort of common presuppositions that we both share before we can enter into this truth-seeking within community life.
Maybe some of those presuppositions are unconscious and may never even be articulated. But somehow, if we can stand on the belief, and this has been helping me do this, that in order to be in the truth or to be searching for the truth, I'm going to have to engage in this dialogue or conversation in which some conflict is going to arise. So let's say the one around grace and works. Anytime there's always this tendency to move towards one of the poles or the other, but the truth is somehow is a paradox. We need to trust, believe in grace, and we need to also have action and works. And so there's in the theological debate about grace and works, for the people who stood on grace and moved toward that pole, there was the heresy of the Quietists, and for those people who moved towards just works, there was the Pelagian heresy.
Pelagius, yeah, Pelagian heresy.
Pelagian heresy. And those are they're really irreconcilable opposites. I guess Niels Bohr, I think it is, the nuclear physicist, I think that's the name, made a statement that the opposite of an ordinary fact is a lie, but the opposite of one great truth is always another great truth. So the great conversation is about being in this eternal dialogue. Whenever we're involved in things that really matter, it's an eternal conversation about irreconcilable opposites, and that conversation needs to be carried on with passion and discipline. So as the Prophet Muhammad said, trust in God, but tie your camel first. And so when my wife and I are in this debate about discipline and freedom with one of our children around some issue, it's so important to continue the conversation, because somehow out of that, truth will seek us out. That's when God seeks us out. that's when God begins to speak to us. We may need to be quiet for a moment in the middle of the heat of this conversation, but those are the moments of when God is revealed in the stranger within us, in the stranger that we meet within our spouse or the other.
I noticed the way you were phrasing that, where the truth seeks us out, and that does really raise the religious question. I'm reminded of Mohandas Gandhi, who loved to talk about God in terms of truth, and he would say God is truth, but then he also would with equal ease say truth is God. And so there is a sense in which whatever it is we're looking for is always beyond us, always veiled for us, because it really represents the absolute mystery that we call God. So God is the source of all truth.
Yes.
God's the one who put the dynamism within us to be infinite searchers, to be looking for the truth, to want to get things right or understand the world as it really is, or especially to know ourselves in depth, and to be able to understand our relationships and how we are to make our contribution. So God put that drive within us, the dynamism, the great search for truth. And of course what we're suggesting here is that there is a communal dimension to all of that you don't do it just in isolation, even though, as I suggested at the beginning, there is a sort of solitary research, or there is a personal quest for one's own truth. There's no doubt about that. But to think that that is somehow isolated is to miss the truth of reality, I think. It's to be out of touch with the real world. Because first of all, we always stand on other people's shoulders. I mean, there's other people who've investigated the great questions and who have contributed to the great conversation, to pick up the metaphor you've been using. The human race has been involved in a great conversation, and when we enter it, we don't come in a vacuum. I mean, there's something there. There's people have understood important truths. They've gotten written down. They've been held in common. They've become part of the wisdom that's guided the life of the world and guided particular communities. We've had the religious truth given to us by the prophets. You mentioned Muhammad. We'd add Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, and we'd add Moses, and we'd talk about Confucius and Lao Tzu, and especially for us Christians, we would talk about Jesus, Jesus being the final truth of God. Jesus is the one who represents the total wisdom of God. So the prophets have fed into the great conversation. So we already have a communal setting for this thing. I mean, we don't usually invent new things. We participate in a conversation, and I think part of it is to learn what people have said before. That means you got to listen.
Yes.
So when you were saying at the beginning, well, you were a good listener, but you didn't think you participated in the conversation all that well. Well, yes, but and one would want to get both things in to have a full human being, wouldn't you? You don't want to just talk and get one's own viewpoint out, but one also has to listen, drink in, hear what the tradition has had to say, hear what other people are saying today. You know, we got to be able to listen to other people's viewpoints if we're going to be in this process of searching out the truth. I think, too, that, let me take you back to that definition you gave from Parker Palmer. It sounds a lot what the member of the Frankfurt School, Habermas, talks about as well, I suppose in more esoteric language. But he's got a great sense of the importance of the community in searching out truth. He thinks that's what it means to be human, is to enter into this communicative network in which we are trying to come up with a truth that will guide us, especially in practical action. This is not just a speculative matter, is it? I mean, if we're going to search for truth, it's going to make a difference in our conduct. We're going to treat each other differently. We're going to deal with society in a different way, and so on. So there is this idea of dialogue being our tool, which will move us to a deeper appreciation of the truth that God has given us. So read that again, the definition from Parker Palmer about truth and how he sees it.
That it's an eternal conversation about things that matter, conducted with passion and discipline.
No, conducted with passion and discipline, so that one tries to get into the conversation, one concern. That's one, I think, the strong feelings that many modern thinkers have, is that the search for truth is not this dispassionate, objective thing that we often thought of or celebrated, but that the truth is more often revealed when we are involved, when we care, when there is a certain passion about the inquiry, that we are now in the circle of searchers. We're within the circle of those who are seeking the truth, and it feels very differently. The sense is that you can't stand the sidelines and sort of just objectively observe in a value-free way and come up with meaningful truth. You can search out facts that way, but you can't find wisdom or knowledge in the way we're speaking about it.
And it's not about the answers. It's not about the outcome, because truth really can't be pinned down, because it's always this paradox. And what helped me was that truth is being engaged in the conversation. I think Rilke had said it when he said, to live the question, and eventually you may live into the answer. But the important part is to be in that dialogue, in that conversation, in the community of truth. And it actually brings us into community. I mean, from that community building model that I had talked about earlier, it was having those differences surface and being able to get different looks at the truth in the round somehow.
What you're saying from Rilke reminds me of Carl Jung, who I'm often quote on this, says that with the great questions it's enough to have wrestled with them. It's no sense in pretending we understand the mystery of death, or that we can control and manipulate the one we call our God, or that we have a total self-awareness of who we are, or we know what freedom is all about in totality. All of those great questions about love and freedom and our deepest hopes and desires and the religious dimension of life are all beyond us. They remain mysterious, incomprehensible in some way. And if one recognizes that, then you can get into the search, and it can become sort of an adventure, or you don't have to feel like you've got all the answers. I think that's very practical for teachers, for parents, for any of us, even in ordinary conversation. There really is no need to pretend like we've got it all figured out or we've got a final answer, because we really don't, and everyone sort of knows that at some level. So if we pretend to know more than we really know, we falsify the whole search, it seems to me.
And as I'm going to be moving back into the field of education again, and it's helped me see that as teacher, I want to create a space, and that's the discipline of keeping the students within the space of, well, I'm an economist, and to look at Keynesian economics or free market economics on the one hand, but then a more social conscious economics, Marxist economics, or some of those that are focusing on the common good as the primary concern, and to then engage in not trying to sell them on any one, but on seeing that there is it's in that conversation, in the struggle, trying to work through this individualism versus common good issue, the public life and the private life issue, that we come closer and closer to the truth. And we're not going to come out with answers, but we're going to move closer towards a more of a mutual understanding of what's needed for us to be able to live together and to continue in this struggle to make a world a better place.
Know that I've been reading some of the writers from Eastern Europe who have been involved in the struggles for liberation there, and they will talk a lot about the great importance of striving for truth, and that you have to fight for truth. When you live in a society where the propaganda is the ordinary fare, and where words don't mean what they seem to mean, really, that you really have to struggle to be truthful. It's too easy to fall into the trap of being co-opted into the official ideology of the communist state, for example, or to not say what you think about political matters, or not express your true opinions about economics and so on. That becomes a way of life for them. Deception's a way of life. Language is used in order to manipulate and control, and not to seek the truth. And these people are saying how all those years when they were in the underground and so on, they had to struggle to be truthful, fight to make words mean what they really are supposed to mean, use language to clarify and not to cloud. And what a great struggle that is. Well, we in the United States, we hear that, and our struggle has not been the same thing. In other words, there's a freedom of speech, freedom of religion, etc., that we've enjoyed. So it seems to me our struggles become much more subtle. The deceptions are harder to unmask. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's easy if you're dealing with communist propaganda all the time, and you recognize it, and you got to decide what you're going to do about it. But here, our world of advertising, our dominant culture, and so on, has deceptions built into it, but it's hard to see them. It's hard to recognize them, and people think you're sort of crazy if you try to rise above them in one way or another. So I'm saying that the problem is the same, that is the seeking the truth in community, but it is almost harder for us to recognize the struggle here in the United States, and I think the means become much more subtle, as a matter of fact. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but it partakes of this idea of struggle for the truth.
Yes.
Fight for the truth. Mm-hmm. That we want to fight to be people of principle and so on.
Well, I just know that this has helped me tremendously in letting go of that echo I hear in my head, but what do I know? Because I've been from growing up in a educational system mostly that where we were given the answers, the teacher, even if we were studying democracy, we weren't studying it in dialogue with each other. It was sort of the teacher and the textbook had the answers for us, which we memorized and learned and put on a test. And so what I really learned was submitting to authority, getting the right answer, rather than engaging myself with others in this conversation, in the conflict, in trusting that I would become closer to the truth by engaging in a community of truth.
Well, Rick, we've been talking about community and the search for truth. I think you personalized it in a really strong and intense way within your own life of having the sense that you were just going to go with the group, but then gradually learning that you had your own point of view, your own truth within your heart, and that you needed to contribute it. And in doing that, you don't hurt other people or put them down, but you contribute to the well-being of the common good. You help to create a more communicative network, and that becomes helpful, and I think that's how we all learn. There's a great point for all of us in that, to both be able to listen, but also to express our view in an honest and open way.